Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And finally, time to get back to Kraftwerk with album number 5, Radioactivity. Okay, so I've not been super looking forward to this review because this is a weird point in Kraftwerk's discography, and just in general kind of a weird album to talk about. See, this is the point at which Kraftwerk made the full transition into 100% electronic music, no longer containing any guitars, flutes, or any acoustic instruments like that. On top of that, they'd also made the transition into their classic lineup of Ralf Hutter, Florian Schneider, Karl Bartos, and Wolfgang Flür, which would carry on for many of their subsequent albums. And it was also Kraftwerk's first straight concept album, centering not only around the theme of radioactivity, as in nuclear radiation, but also around the theme of, like, broadcasting, i.e. activity on the radio. You know, I've seen this title described as deadpan humor, but, like, did anyone actually ever laugh at that title? I mean, it's clever, but I don't know about funny. You kind of know what you're getting into right from the cover. But whatever, never mind that. Now, the other reason I wasn't really looking forward to this review is mainly because it's probably the mainline Kraftwerk album I have the least emotional connection to. I heard this album for the first time much later than most of them, like sometime during high school, early, I guess. And it does not have the nostalgia power of most of their other albums. Not to mention, this is definitely one of their most experimental albums. It's very weird, but unlike their self-titled albums, it's not just pointless screwing around. Every detail has a clear purpose and means something in the context of the album. It's just there's not as much of the fantastic melodies that I love Kraftwerk for. I mean, there's some of that, but there's a lot of tracks that are more like little weird experiments / interludes, sometimes, like, primarily silent tracks. Like, a good example of this would be our opener, Geiger Counter. Or Geiger Counter? I don't know how you say it. This track is just a kick drum repeatedly playing very slowly, and then speeding up as time goes on, adding weird electronic effects here and there. Obviously imitating a Geiger counter, detecting radioactive material. Like, I don't think this even really qualifies as a song. I don't even know what you would call it. Like, I guess it's an intro to the real opening song and title track. And there's a lot of tracks that are short and carry conceptual significance, but aren't, I don't know, really music. Such as Intermission, which is some sort of transition track that I guess is imitating a radio test broadcast with its pure sine wave tone frequencies and long silences. There's News, which is a bunch of muffled voiceovers from Ralf and Florian imitating a news broadcast, which of course happens to discuss radioactive power plants, albeit in German, so I had to look it up to find out that. But I kind of suspected as much. The album switches from English to German a lot, by the way. Most of the tracks have lyrics in both languages, but I digress. There's The Voice of Energy, which is just a vocoder talking about, well, energy, also in German. And Uranium, which is a vocoder talking about uranium, though over synth choirs as well. And I'll get to those synth choirs. All these tracks are only about, like, a minute long, if even that, so it feels like you can blink and then suddenly go from track 4 to track 8. Although it's not like they pass by inaudibly. They're all really distinct, and it's near impossible not to notice when they happen. Now, of course, there are actual songs here as well. The title track is about as catchy as Kraftwerk songs come. Doot 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 doot. Now, this track is also significantly darker than the usual from them, super brooding and atmospheric, thanks mainly to the use of the above-mentioned synth choirs, played on their Vaco Orchestron keyboard. or however you say that. These synth choirs have such a distinctive sound that I can't hear anything that sounds even remotely similar without linking it to this album. Radioactivity is the definitive dark synth choir track. Even if it's not the only notable thing about said track, like they play the lyrics of the track in Morse code, which is pretty cool. I think it is probably my favorite track on the album. Big surprise there that I like the big single. Although it's either that or the closer, Om Sweet Om. That's a really nice finish to the album. Starts out with vocoders repeatedly saying the title. Om Sweet Om. The brother's gonna work, get out. And it just plays this cheerful melody that starts out slow but slowly gets faster as it goes on. Just leaving you out feeling nice, you know? I appreciate it. There are lots of other good songs on here. Airwaves is a really fast-paced and catchy track with a main melody that is played by some theremin-esque synth. Maybe a bit repetitive, but still fun. When airwaves ring, distant voices sing. Antenna is similar, slower and more mechanical, but just as fun. Got a good bass line in there. The way the vocals echo a lot make it kind of difficult to sing along with, although the fact that a lot of it is in German probably doesn't help either. Still a really fun song. I'm the antenna catching vibration, you're the transmitter, give information. There's Radio Stars, which I don't think I can count as an interlude because it's almost the same length as Antenna, but that's a particularly weird one. I think they were trying to subvert people's expectations with this one, making people think the track would be about pop singers, i.e. Video Killed the Radio Star, although this predates the Buggles by like 4 years. Whatever. Point is, the track is actually about quasars and pulsars, i.e. those galaxies that shoot out radio waves. And yeah, it just sounds really weird, like this repetitive synth loop. Whispering German vocals that say the same words over and over for most of the track. And there's also a lot of dissonant vocoders as well, which are just tonal enough that I think I can qualify this track as music. But whatever. And there's also Transistor, which starts out with the sound of radio tuning, but then goes on to play this cheery little synth melody that resembles classical music. It's pretty short, but I don't know if I'd put it in the same bin as the other interludes, since, well, first of all, it's not as short, it at least breaks the 2-minute barrier, but like it's actual music and not just conceptual effects. And maybe you consider the conceptual effects to be actual music, but whatever. I'm sure there's some of you, though, who have read the video description and have noticed that I've kind of been dancing around one particular track on this album. I saved for last Radioland. And I'll just come out and say it, I don't like this track, and I think it brings down my personal enjoyment of this album a noticeable amount. Like, this track has always creeped me out and gotten under my skin, but what makes me not like it as much is because I genuinely can't tell if they're trying to creep me out on purpose. Like, the track's main attribute is the use of the orchestron to make these high-pitched violin sounds with a repetitive 3-note bass line, boom, boom, boom. And it moves super slowly, occasionally bringing in the German vocals and these harsh vocoders like the ones on Radio Stars. The weird thing is, though, is that everything's in like a major key, and the melody is like some kind of traditional German lullaby or something like that. I feel like they're trying to capture like some beautiful European landscape or something. And the lyrics are about how cool it is you can turn a knob on this box and then like waves fly through the sky and music comes out. But it's all created using really chilling and creepy synth instrumentation. I have no idea what to feel whenever this track comes on, and I'll be honest, most of the time it bothers me. On top of that, the slow tempo of this track just makes it seem to really drag on, even though it's only a little shorter than the title track, which feels like a quicker listen somehow. That being said, I also will have to admit, I can't bring myself to say I'd want the track removed entirely. Besides the fact that taking it or any track on here would totally ruin the flow of the album, I think Radioland is actually kind of an important track to this album, and how I feel about the album overall. It's kind of a middle ground between all these weird, creepy interludes and these catchy pop influence tracks and other parts that help cement the atmosphere I get out of this whole album. And I will have to say, the atmosphere of this album is very different from anything else I've heard in my life. I mean, it does sound ancient and outdated, but to be perfectly honest, I think this actually works in its favor. Because when I listen to this album, I don't feel like I'm being transported back to 1975 when electronic music was still in its early stages. I feel like I'm going back to the mid-1940s, when the US was going to drop the atomic bomb and radio was still most people's main source of news and entertainment. I associate this album with imagery like old black and white movies, or radio newscasters, or some of those waveform visuals you see on oscilloscopes. And I think the atmosphere of Radioland is a big part of what makes this album take me that far back in time. There are some Kraftwerk albums that are supposed to invoke visions of the future, but I'm fairly certain this is not one of them. I mean, it's not like anyone really cares about radio in this day and age, and by the way, yes, I say that as someone whose dad and worked in the radio business for 20 years and has a lot more exposure to radio than most. So, that this album about radio sounds like it came from a bygone era gives it some more weight to it. Granted, I still tend to associate the radio in my life with classic rock and all the music my dad likes, and not with this particular album. So it's not like my perspective is the same as that of someone who saw this album came out in 1975, but I mean, that's what you get from hearing a 21-year-old talk about this music. Why you listen to those gosh darn millennials? Regardless, final thoughts on the album. On one hand, if you ask me, this is probably one of their weaker releases. It does always sound to me like it came from a time where I was not yet alive, and on top of that, as much as I like tracks like Airwaves and Antenna and Ohm Sweet Home, I really don't think I'd put these tracks on the same level as stuff like Trans Europe Express or The Man Machine or Computer World, mainly for nostalgia reasons. Even the title track, as great as it is, and having more nostalgia for it thanks to Minimum Maximum, still feels like almost uncharacteristically dark for them, and I don't think it would make my top 10 or anything. But for all my writing on this album and my various nitpicks, I cannot deny that this is still an amazingly creative album with a super unique sound that is nothing like anything else I've ever heard from Kraftwerk or elsewhere. And I'd also be lying if I said I didn't see myself coming back to it again. I still pop this one on from time to time and still enjoy it, so take that all as you will. It's not their best, but there's still a lot of awesomeness to come in the Kraftwerk catalog, so that's really not saying much. But for this, I'm overall feeling 7.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.